everybody, and welcome back to Pulpit of the Last Days. Jesus warned us that in the latter days the entire church would slumber and sleep, and the enemy would come in by stealth and deception. Tares would be sown among the wheat. In other words, false doctrines would be planted inside the church. And wherever they took root, the hearts of people would turn away from God more and more. Now, these people had an initial interest in God that was genuine. That's why Jesus refers to them as part of the kingdom in Matthew 25. That's why the same passage refers to them as part of the 10 virgins. But their devotion to God will erode through these teachings to gradually be replaced more and more with a focus on themselves. This was foretold in 2 Timothy 3, 1 through 5. For men will be lovers of themselves rather than lovers of God, shown here in yellow. Skipping down to verse 7, incredibly, this is a learned behavior. All this selfishness is something they're actually being schooled in. We can see in verse 5, because it has a form of godliness, that they have learned this from the church. And skipping down to verse 7 again, that this is not according to the knowledge of the truth. This is not something that's coming from Scripture, but is something else that they're always learning, something vast that they're studying, something with a form of godliness that is actually schooling them in such a selfish focus. Many Christians will become enthused with this counterfeit wisdom and study it eagerly, and it will be vast. Paul says they are always learning, but never coming to the knowledge of the truth. And its many teachers will be just as plentiful. He says that they are heaping to themselves teachers who will show them how to pursue their selfish desires under a form of godliness. Me is the constant beat of that drum. So what is it we're talking about here? Since the days when Paul gave those prophecies nearly 20 centuries ago, the enemy has had plenty of time to plan his assault. About 150 years ago, his counterfeit wisdom was ready for its debut in the world, although it remained obscure until after the Korean War. Now, obviously, I am talking about psychology, that vast realm of wisdom which teaches us so much about self and which justifies a selfish focus in so many ways, just as the Bible foretold that it would. If secular man was a god, psychology would be his Bible. So what would it look like if you tried to bring that into the church? In the years since then, from about the mid-1950s to about 1970, psychology grew exponentially in Western society, and it has continued to grow. But the church suffered a huge decline during that same period. Now I have to wonder if this is not what Jesus foretold when he said that the entire church would slumber and sleep, and an enemy would come in to sow his tares in the wheat field. After all, the church was down in the doldrums. For all practical purposes, they were asleep. But psychology was new and interesting, chic and sophisticated, maybe even spiritual. As church attendance continued to fall, a troubled clergy was tempted. Maybe this new wisdom could help them in their faltering attendance. Maybe it could help that tired old message of the cross, the foolishness of the thing preached, Jesus Christ and Him crucified. The people seemed to like it. They seemed to be talking about it among themselves. And so their attention turned more and more towards psychology to shore that faltering attendance. And in the process, they set up a conflict with God Himself, which He would never honor, and by which they would never know Him. For since in the wisdom of God, the world through wisdom did not know God, it pleased God through the foolishness of the message preached to save those who believe, meaning saving them through the gospel. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God. For it is written, He catches the wise in their own craftiness. And again, the Lord knows the thoughts of the wise, that they are futile. Nevertheless, psychology was welcomed into the pulpit as Christianity's strong new friend. It was even boldly proclaimed by some that there is no conflict between Christianity and psychology, as if they had even studied that out. Because the scriptures we just quoted, and many, many others, would profoundly disagree with that conclusion. Psychology is the wisdom of this world. It is foolishness with God, and by it they will never know Him. Maybe that's why Jesus says of those on this side of the church who follow that foreign wisdom, that they are the 5 foolish virgins, and depart from me, I never knew you. Psychology is a genuine spiritual counterfeit. Now we'll talk about that further in our next video. But it may tickle the ears, but it's unsound and it's untrue, and it does not deserve to be put on a par with Scripture. But hearts were hardened, consciences were seared. As the assimilation of psychology into the pulpit continued, the decline in church attendance was arrested. I hate to put it this way, but for those preachers, their jobs were saved, even if their converts weren't. Further efforts to Christianize psychology would follow. In particular, Christian ministers themselves would begin to cloak psychology in Christian-sounding terminology and phraseology. 2 Peter 2 verse 3 says, "By covetousness they will exploit you with deceptive words." So the ministers themselves have endowed upon psychology its form of godliness, just as the Scriptures foretold they would. Through a similar approach, spin-off ministries would be formed. Now these would address subjects that really are mentioned in the Bible, usually very spiritual ones. But all the terminology involved would be taken and redefined and interbred with psychology along the way, so that the result was essentially psychological, although it now had a new spiritual guise. Usually this turned into some sort of body ministry. Those who were involved in teaching it became mediators, so in that sense the harm redoubled, making these teachings twofold the children of hell as psychology itself. Now these are all very explosive ministries, so we'll have to come back to them much later. But let me just say for now that about half of the end-time heresies find their basis in psychology. But returning now to psychology itself. Under the alliance of the 2 great wisdoms, the Bible and psychology, the Bible quickly became the junior partner, since it was constantly interpreted through psychology's grid of reasoning if it was used at all. When it was, the stories in the Bible were treated like fables, like Aesop's fables. Now, a fable is a short little story or a case study with a moral or an important life's lesson to it, such as psychology loves to use, even without the Bible. Recall now the words of Paul, that they will turn aside to fables. Then those biblical characters would be analyzed so that biblical proofs could be offered for psychology's predetermined conclusions. But that's all very self-serving. If the premise is psychology, then the result will be too. It has nothing to do with Scripture. Frankly, Scripture is being reduced to the role of a stooge to that process. It's all lip service. Because if Scripture was really given its due, psychology would be shown to the door. Through this process, the church, although upholding a form of godliness, was drifting further and further away from the truth, departing from the faith, giving heed to deceiving spirits and doctrines of demons, as the New Testament foretold of them. And this, far more than the post-war decline in attendance, was the real falling away that Paul had envisioned in 2 Thessalonians 2 verse 3 for the last days. O church, God has rejected your trusted ally, and you will not prosper by them. But the emergence of psychology in the pulpit is a recognizable step in the end-time sequence of events that many of us have lived to see in our lifetime. We'll discuss this further in our next video. I hope you enjoyed this video from Pulpit of the Last Days, short essays about the end-time church as foretold in the New Testament. If you did enjoy it, please go ahead and click on that thumbs up button. For previous videos, check out our website at pulpitofthelastdays.com. Also, we post new videos weekly, so if you'd like to receive more videos like this one, all you need to do is subscribe.